Just as a way of quick introduction here, the Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, resettlement agency staff, refugees purpose sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. And just a few words on housekeeping here. As a reminder for everyone joining us today, every one of our Lunch and Learn webinars is automatically, everyone who's on is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, please feel free to submit a question in the questions box and chat. We can assist you. And if you have any questions during the webinar, you can drop those questions in the chat, and we will have some time for Q&A near the end. And additionally, this presentation is being recorded, and any resources as well as the recording will be sent to everyone following the webinar, which now brings us to our presenter today. We are, as always, happy to have Lynette Pearl join us. She's Senior Program Officer of Housing with the Refugee Housing Solutions, which is a technical housing provider who supports resettlement practitioners, landlords, and property managers, refugees, and volunteers across the U.S., and partners with them to develop and implement cohesive strategies to increase the availability and affordability of housing. Today, Lynette will be giving expert advice on how to search for safe, sanitary, affordable housing in a challenging housing market. And so the guidance will focus on how to watch out for predatory leases, how to do a proper inspection before signing a lease, and tenants' rights when signing a lease. So thank you, and I'll pass it over to our speaker, Lynette. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that introduction. I'm going to make sure that we get started because there are a lot of material we need to share today. And again, let me share my screen. And you're going to be my eyes to make sure you can see my presentation.
We see your desktop. And now we see your presentation. You're good.
So we're good to go. So let's get started because we have a lot of material to cover today. And David kind of gave you a summary of what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover some best practices, what to look for during a housing search, but also how to conduct a pre-lease inspection. That's very important because the goal is to secure safe sanitary housing. And what are some discriminatory practices that a newcomer might see during the application process? And we're going to kind of give an overview of the fair housing, but also there's going to be additional material because fair housing is so important and I can't give it justice in that short time period. So we're going to go ahead and send you some supplement material when it comes to that. And then recognizing predatory lease practices. Just because we're in a housing crisis, I know sometimes it could be tempting to get a client into a lease, but we want to make sure we're not putting them into predatory leases. So we're going to go over that. So let's talk about some pre-screening tips to give you kind of an overview what a landlord could possibly lead. The one thing is the pre-screening process, it is a tool that helps landlords gauge an applicant's ability to fulfill a lease term successfully. Well, since landlords have a pre-screening process to gauge an applicant's ability to succeed, a rental applicant should also have one as well. A good screening process can help applicants avoid fraudulent rental practices and prevent them from entering into a disaster rental experience with a questionable landlord. So in this section, I'm going to talk about practical ways that you probably never thought about. One thing is check out online reviews. Now, an online apartment review and ratings, they are a great way to get more information regarding the property and potential landlord beyond what's shared on a listing or website. Unfortunately, there are some reviews out there that can be misleading. So how do you evaluate and utilize an apartment review to determine if the information is credible? Well, you first need to determine if the reviewer is legitimate. Now, a reviewer can have a negative or positive information, or it could be a motive behind it. For example, a tenant who's being evicted would possibly write a lethal review, or an employee who wants to improve the image of an apartment would post a glowing review. So the information motive is the reason why reviews do exist. So if a review is overly negative without specifics, it could be a distraught tenant, or if it's too positively exaggerated, the review, or if you seem like there's some brochure-like language, it could possibly be an employee. One thing you need to do, you need to watch out for vague reviews. A vague review with little details may be the work of a fake poster, sometimes called a review troll, we call them. This person never actually lived at the property. They enjoy posting fake or misleading complaints on review websites, so to see what kind of response they could get. So be careful of those. Look for reviews that discuss issues like maintenance. This is very important. Maintenance, management responsiveness, the neighborhood's desirability, and the apartment's price. There are reviews that are similar in nature. Look and see if all the reviews have they're saying the same thing. Are they talking about the same issue? Or are they talking about the same problem? That's worth noting. And does the landlord reply? That's very important as well. If a review has a response from the landlord with an apology or a possible solution, it does shows that the landlord is responsive, and does care about what's being said about the property. Another thing you can use is ratings. It is common to see reviews at the low or high end of the star rating system. So while there are usually fewer scores in the middle, the 3-4 star reviews, these tend to be more detailed and objectives. Now, the one thing you need to look at when you're looking at reviews is key to check the date. And the older reviews can still provide you a little bit of insight, but you don't know what has changed since then. Is the property under new management? Have there been personnel changes? Because as we know, in property management, there's a lot of turnover. So has the property undergone renovations? That can affect the review as well. These changes likely won't be reflected in a review over a year old, so keep that in mind when reviewing older reviews. And another thing I tell housing specialists and sponsors who are helping newcomers find housing, is the listed copied? That's a key in determining fraud. A common practice housing scammers do is they copy legitimate listings word for word in order to make their ad appealing. So just simply copy and paste the text and do a Google search to see if a duplicate ad comes up with different company and a different contact information. So I'm an example type of person. Here is an example of an apartment rating. Let's look at the first part. It says, I've lived at Market Station for the past 2 years in 2 different apartments. Market Station has the best amenities. And then again, as you can see below, the manager has responded. And this is an apartment rating from 2021. Now, even though we're in 2024, I need to probably update the slide, but here is the same apartment complex with the reviews, the apartment ratings. Great community, maintenance very responsive, office still, staff provides great customer service. So with this, you can tell that it's a different year from 2001 to 2023. Basically, the reviews are similar in nature. So this could possibly be a legitimate review. And the reason why I use this example, I used to live there, so I do know that the reviews that's being said about this particular property, they're accurate. So this is kind of an example how you can use apartment ratings to determine if a property is worth applying for or referring a newcomer to for housing. So we're going to go ahead because I really want to make this interactive since we did cover this section quickly. What ways do you determine if an apartment rating is legitimate? So what you can do, we're going to do a Slido. You can use your camera on your phone and take that code and kind of give me an example. I'm just going to do a check-in to see if you guys got that information. So I'm going to give you a few seconds on that. And let me see the responses. Okay, guys, not everybody at once. Great. That's a good answer. Good answer. Good answers. Talk about maintenance. Maintenance responded. Check the date of the review. Okay, you guys caught on. We're going to move on and we're going to have spot checks. And then I'm going to check in with you guys to make sure if you have any questions. So yes, everybody's catching on. Great. Let's move on. We're going to go into ownership and financial status. Landlord screening process is used to determine the applicant's financial stability, whether there be safety risk to the apartment community. So it's crucial that the applicant screen a potential landlord's financial status as well in order to avoid fraud and entering into a lease with the housing provider that is in default. This is very important. I've been doing a lot of TA with a lot of affiliates, and a lot of sponsors and housing specialists are helping newcomers secure housing. And there's a lot of fraud that's going on. So we're going to talk about, especially if you're trying to house someone in a home, how do you check for fraudulent behavior? So the one thing I do recommend when I was a housing specialist, especially when I was about to house a client in a home, I would do an online public property search. A renting apartment is most likely to be foreclosed upon during a tenancy also too. So it may be a bad idea even if there's a new owner that allows the tenant to stay. So a tenant may risk getting a new owner who doesn't might be a conscious landlord. So by doing an online public property search, you can find out if they're in the process of being foreclosed on. So when the owner has failed to make a loan or mortgage payment, a notice of default can be filed in the county where the property is located. Because the information is public, you can search and check the notice status through the county records office called the Recorder of Deeds or Recorder Office. Another thing you can do is check the ownership status of the property. This is so important before leasing with a private landlord. It's a good idea to check the status. It helps prevent being scammed and rental fraud. There are resources available to help verify home ownership. And one of the things you can do, you can go on to check the local assessor's office. You can do the county clerk's office, local library, and a title company. And another thing you can Google the landlord as well. I kind of skipped over some things, and please forgive me. I'm gonna show this short video because you don't realize how much fraud that is going on. So we're gonna look at this short video.
Gigi Nadai found the perfect rental home.
We even bought our new rug. We got our Wi-Fi turned on.
This cute little cottage.
We found this apartment on Craigslist, this house. We came and we called the landlord. They told us to meet him over here to look at it.
They met the landlord, signed this lease, and paid him a $500 money order deposit. But days after moving in, they got a visit from the real landlord.
They were coming here to lock us out. We didn't even know what was going on.
Turns out the lease and rental company were all fake. The real owner wanted them out and was turning off their water.
The water they turned the water off.
It's called the house rental scam, and I tell you, it's getting slicker and slicker. Scammers will find a legitimate house or apartment for rent. They'll repost the ad on Craigslist, then they'll give victims a phony lease to sign and take their deposit money.
It just feels like we're just lost. There's nothing we can do.
It looks like they can do nothing, so.
That's what it looks like.
Dila and Gigi went to the police, but learned they're probably out of luck.
It's a civil situation right now. I'm hoping that the landlord and the tenants that are currently living there will let them stay there.
We contacted the owners, where a man told us they will now let the couple stay 30 days to fill out an application and submit a new deposit. But Dila doesn't know if they can afford it now.
I don't know what we're going to do. You know, they got our money.
And this is more common than what you think, especially with scammers knowing that there's a housing crisis and they know that a lot of newcomers are here, they're seeking housing. One thing I have found in my TA, there's this misconception that a lot of newcomers are receiving a lot of subsidies, subsidies for housing. So guess what? You're going to have these people coming out to do scams, housing scams, because they know they want to find housing. They know that they don't have the traditional documentation. So guess what? The scammers are coming out. So that's very important that if you are trying to lease up a newcomer with a private landlord, do your due diligence. One thing I do highly recommend, I used to work with the title company. A lot of title companies, they can research a property deed and perform title searches. Now, with the title company, they do charge to do a title search. However, if they know that you're a nonprofit, at that time I worked for a nonprofit, I was housing veterans, so they knew our mission. So it was like a write-off for them. So they donated their time to do title searches for us when there was some questionable things going on when I was trying to lease up a client. So I highly recommend that you reach out to a title company to see if they're willing to donate their time, especially if they know all the good work you guys are doing trying to house newcomers. One thing I always did too, when I was checking out if a landlord was legitimate, I would check for code violations. So even though a title search will allow you to locate the owner of the property, it does not tell you if there are some issues with the property. So you can check with your local county or city county enforcement department to see if there's some nuisance violations that may include litter, trash, uncut grass. This is a red flag. It tells you if this landlord really takes care of their property. If they have several code violations, again, that's a red flag. Another thing to check for fraud is the online ad professionally written? If an ad has questionable grammar or spelling, it could be a scammer. So carefully review the rental listings and check for spelling mistakes, odd wording, and overuse of capital letters. I do want to add a caveat to that. This is just, again, a tool you can use, but it shouldn't be your end all, because you do have a lot of landlords that English is not their first language. So they are placing ads. So I just want to make sure I add that caveat. This is just a tool. So if you do see these things, I still say use these other tools to do the screening, because I have gotten a lot of great landlords. Even though when I looked at the ad, it was kind of questionable, but come to find out after I did my due diligence and interviewed them, come to find out English was not their first language. So that's the reason why their ad was kind of, some things were not properly there. So we're going to do a check-in, and David, you're my eyes because I can't see is there any questions, or should I continue to go on?
I think you're happy to continue to go on. Feel free if people have anything they want to drop in the chat, but thank you.
So we're going to talk about pre-lease inspections. A property's condition is the best indicator of whether a landlord is good or bad. A responsible landlord, they do maintain the property, ensuring it's safe, well, and cared for. So a pre-lease inspection not only determines the property habitability, but it also serves an opportunity to identify pre-existing damages to the unit or home before moving a client in. So this pre-existing move-in inspection is not only a way to identify the damages, because you don't want a newcomer leasing up and getting blamed for damages that were already there, but it also gives you an opportunity to see how that landlord handles repairs. So again, this is just a summary of how to do a brief inspection, but we have additional materials if you really want to know how to do a thorough inspection. The first thing I used to check for when I was doing inspection is safety features, and if they're in working order. Safety features such as the fire alarms, the sprinklers, and the fire extinguishers, were they in the hallway, were they in the common areas? Did it have smoke and carbon monoxide detectors? Were they working appropriately? According to the National Fire Alarm and Signal Code, smoke detectors should or outside each separate sleeping area on every level of the home, including the basement. Now, if a landlord does comply with the smoke detector requirements, it shows that they do take their tenants' safety seriously. Another thing you can check for is electrical. If you're helping your newcomer do the pre-inspection walkthrough, are there any exposed wires inside the unit and outside the unit? Also, is the power working? A rental property should always have power on when an applicant is inspecting it, even if the unit is unoccupied. You should when you're walking through with your client, you can test the fans, I say appliances, or inspect dark rooms without power. If a unit does not have electricity, that's a red flag for me. Because always you're supposed to have electricity on, even if it's unoccupied. I always would take, I would take my phone charger with me, especially I was doing a walkthrough to make sure that it was a safe unit for my client, and I would plug it in to make sure all the plugs were working properly. I would test everything. That was the light switches. I would go off and on. That's something I used to do to make sure there's no electrical issues. And also, I would also take pictures. If there was something I saw wrong with the unit, before I would let a client lease up, I would take pictures and then say, okay, can we handle this issue? So that's very important to take pictures. And if you are not doing the walkthrough with your client, this is something you should be teaching them to do, to take pictures of the unit. Another thing to check for during an actual inspection before signing a lease is the thermostat. Is it in working order? So how do you know if it's broken, if it's malfunctioning? My thing is, I would test, especially depending on where you live at. I live in the Midwest currently, but when I used to live in the South, the one important thing was to make sure that the AC was working. Sometimes if I was doing an inspection during the summer months, I would make sure the AC was working. I would flip it on, kind of hang out a little bit and finish my inspection to see if the unit got colder. Of course, then turn the heat on to make sure that's working as well. So those are the things that you need to make sure the thermostat is working. Another thing is working appliances. Now, I want to add this caveat too. Now, if the client is responsible for bringing the appliances, then they're responsible for the appliances. However, if the landlord is supplying the appliances, then they're responsible for the care of it. So if there are already appliances in the unit, I suggest turning the, checking the refrigerator, making sure it's clean, it's cold, the doors are sealing. Check the stove top. I would turn the stove on to make sure it was working, the oven. Dishwasher I would test, but that's not, mandatory. The microwave, especially if they don't have any means to warm up food. And again, we talked about the air unit. Plumbing is very important. So when doing a tour, you can check the plumbing by looking underneath the sink. When you're turning the water on, is there anything dripping underneath the sink? Also, I would make sure there's no water leaking when I turned it on above. I go to the bathroom, I would flush the toilet. I would make sure there's no water leaking around the toilet, but also check to see if the water is getting hot and warm. Now, one thing I would do, I would kind of hang out after my inspection. If the toilet's still running, that could be a possible issue. So that's another thing. And check the windows and the doors. Make sure the windows and doors, the doorknobs, they don't stick, the doors don't stick. Make sure there's no egresses. I would also do a mock fire drill to make sure if something happened, my client could open up windows, the doors, nothing is sticking. That is so important. And also make sure external doors and windows are properly insulated. I'm a big thing on this. I look for tripping hazards. That's very important. If there's carpet provided, is it carpet or towel? Is it properly installed and not worn down? Not only does adequate lining in stairways and parking lots prevent slips and falls, but it's also could be a safety issue as well. So when I would do a walkthrough, I would look and make sure that, okay, is there any tripping hazards, especially if I have a client that has children, but also are there some blind spots? Is the place properly lit? Can my client walk from the parking lot to their unit safely and is safely lit without any blind spots? And this is one of the big things you need to check for is mold and mildew. Now, mold is the most common source of air quality problems in living spaces, and it can be difficult to detect since it hides in hard to see areas such as walls, ventilation ducts, and crawl systems. But there are some inspection tips you can use to determine if there's possible mold in the unit. The first is, does the unit smell musty? That's a sign. Mold has like an earthly smell and can smell like rotting leaves or decaying wood. A lot of times mold and mildew, they are used interchangeably because mildew is a certain type of mold, just FYI. And mold and mildew can appear similar, but there are some differences. Mildew is powdery and downy in texture, and it appears as white or gray. And sometimes the white color may turn to yellow, but blue, green, or yellow. But regardless if it is mold or mildew, inspect for black or dark green spots on walls, ceilings. You should also check for mold around tubs and underneath the sink. So this is just an example of what it looks like. Again, David is going to send you some supplementary material. We do have a partnership with Highest, and this young lady, she did a great job. I'm getting some information on how to do an inspection, but also she addresses mold and other issues during a pre-inspection. So we'll make sure you get that as well. Let's back this up. One thing you can do is check the overall condition of the unit. Is there paint or wallpaper peeling? Check for cracks, stains on the walls and the carpet, and also check for rodent droppings and chew marks. Now, a lot of people don't know this. Since bed bugs can live in an empty unit for months, so you must check for their presence. I recommend bring a flashlight in order to look for fecal stains on molding and outlet covers. Bed bug feces, they are reddish and brown in nature, and also look out for black spots on walls because that could be bed bug casings. I'm going to show you some pictures. And if you kind of squeamish, maybe you want to turn a little bit away from this, but it's part of an example. So this first picture is an example of what mouse droppings look like. So when you're doing a pre-inspection, you should look for something like that. The second picture, this is what roach droppings look like. And this is what bed bug droppings look like. And this is what bed bug droppings with shells look like. So, again, these are just tips on how you can do a pre-inspection. One thing also, I tell housing specialists, does the landlord rush the tour? The tour should not be rushed, but have a natural flow. If possible, it should start with the front entry, the kitchen to the living area, bathrooms and baths, and then to the outside. A reputable landlord will have a smooth tour with ample time to showcase the property and answer all your questions. Now, I'm going to share a secret with you. When I was in property management, we used to call it the tour flow. And the tour flow was, there was a specific way we would take a potential applicant from the office to the unit. And that way was a way to showcase the property in a high light, a good light. So they're already arranged the way they're going to take you from that office to that actual unit, because they only want you to see the best parts of that property. So it's very important, if you already have some questions about getting a client leased up, walk throughout the property. Don't just stick to the tour from the office to the unit. So I'm just giving you an inside property management secret that they purposely set up the tour a certain way so you can only see the best parts of the property. One thing I would recommend, if you have the time, is conduct an after-hour tour. That tells you a lot, especially when I was a housing specialist, and if I had to house a family with small children or children, and I had some questions, or if I felt the property was questionable, I would take my time out. Again, this is not for everybody. I would take my time out to go after hours and just see what was really going on the weekend with that property. That gave me a real view of how that property truly is especially the weekend at night. But again, that's not for everybody. This is just tips. So we're going to go ahead and go into the fair housing. Again, fair housing is so important. So I'm just going to give a summary, but we do have additional trainings when it comes to fair housing and materials. But we're just going to give an overview of this. So because housing is a human right, refugees and other newcomers to the United States deserve to live in a community of their choice, free from discrimination, safe, stable, and affordable housing. They deserve that, but it's not always there. And unfortunately, some newcomers, they cannot secure safe, stable, affordable housing due to discriminatory practices. Now, the Fair Housing Act, it is a federal law that prohibits housing and housing-related discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, gender, family status, or disability. The Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968 in the aftermath of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination as an extension of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It has been amended in several times since then, since 1964. And the great thing about it, again, it depends on your state and also your city and your local government. There are some additional protections under the Fair Housing Act. So I highly recommend that you know what fair housing laws are, but also know what the additional protections are in your state, in your city, and in your local government as well. One of the things is, I'm originally from Chicago. One of the things that they have added is the source of income. So you cannot discriminate against a person based on their source of income. So I do know the source of income. That is one protection that a lot of states are implementing. So just check with your state laws to see if that's one of them, because that is a big thing, especially with newcomer population. They're trying to lease up. And of course, they don't have the traditional documentation, or they don't have a job yet, but they do have the support of the affiliate. And a lot of them are being discriminated because they don't have that traditional source of income. So we're going to go over some of what it looks like. So with the disability, the Fair Housing Act, it does prohibit discrimination against a person in a housing transaction because of their mental or physical disability. And FHA defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that significantly limits one or more major life activities. Again, I'm an example type of person. So an example of this would be if, for example, if you have a client and they have a service animal and you're helping them apply for a unit, and the property manager says, well, unfortunately, we cannot accept the animal because we have a no pet policy with this particular property. If your client has a disability and it's a service animal and they have a reasonable accommodation, that property has to accept that service animal. They might ask your client to fill out a reasonable accommodation, which is fair. They're required to, but they have to accept that animal. And also, they cannot charge them a pet deposit or pet rent on that service animal. So just FYI. However, your client has to still pay a deposit. If the animal does damage the unit, then the damages would come out of the regular deposit, but they cannot charge them an additional pet deposit, just FYI. So another example is race or color. Despite the fact that racial discrimination is illegal, it still occurs, unfortunately. In some cases, people of color outright are denied a lease or mortgage based on their skin color, while others, they are steered towards specific neighborhoods known for high crime rates, poor access to schools, or other negative characteristics. I'm going to make this clear. FHA prohibits housing discrimination based on race or color. An example would be if a property manager only shows a person of color apartments or units in the area or building where other people of color live. This is a great example. Another example of that would be, my younger sister hates when I use an example, but I will. My younger sister she has a fair skin tone than I do. One time I was challenged to do a discrimination investigation. So I used her. She's very fair skinned. When she went in, she was treated totally different than I was. That's an example of how a person can be discriminated based on their actual color. We can be still African Americans, which she is, but she's a different color. She's lighter skinned. She has light eyes. She was treated different in an application process than I was because I'm a dark skin. So I just want to give you an example of that because a lot of people felt like, well, my client was African American. Well, my client was a different ethnicity. They were not discriminated against, but you can have that same client, another client of that same ethnicity, but a different color and still be discriminated against. So I just want to make sure that you guys know that. National origin, FHA prohibits discrimination against a person in a housing transaction because of their national origin. FHA protects people regardless, I'm gonna say this, regardless of their immigration status. Different treatment in housing because of a person's ancestry, ethnicity, birthplace, or culture or language, it is illegal. So an example is if a client goes in and the landlord refuses to rent to a family because the applicant or the family members do not speak English, or they deny them housing because the applicant is not a U.S. citizen. So that is an example of discrimination in that area. Another one is family status. FHA prohibits discrimination in housing against families with children under the age of 18 or impose special requirements or conditions or place an unreasonable restriction on the total number of persons who may reside in the dwelling. Now, I want to add a caveat to that. Now, if the landlord is enforcing the code requirements, then that's not discrimination because there are code requirements, how many people can live in a unit or a home. So just FYI. If you are a sponsor or a volunteer and you're working with the client and you feel that they've been discriminated against because of the size of their family, I said you can check with your local housing authority or your city municipality, especially your housing authority. They can give you information on occupancy, how many people can be in per square foot, and how many people can be in each bedroom. So they have to follow those HUD guidelines. So if you're curious about that, I say reach out to your local housing authority because they can give you that information. An example of this would be if the landlord tries to charge a higher rent or deposit because the applicant has children. And then sex orientation, the FHA makes it unlawful to discriminate in housing on the basis of one's sex, sexual orientation, and gender identification. With this, especially with the gender identification, depending on what state you live in, there might be additional protections. And I do know the state of Illinois has added additional protections in that area. So in recent years, the department's focus in this area has been to challenge sexual harassment in housing. Women, particularly those who are poor and with limited housing options, often have little recourse but to tolerate humiliation and degradation of sexual harassment or risk. This is one thing I highlight a lot because I've seen this a lot in my 18 plus years of housing. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of women, not women anymore, but a lot of people, low income applicants, not just applicants, but low income tenants, they are harassed. Landlords have sexually harassed them. If you give me sexual favors, then you don't have to pay your rent. I've seen this so often and it's sad, but it exists. And again, sexual orientation. An example would be, as I gave, in the application process, if a landlord refuses another to rent an applicant, either because they're pregnant or because they are a woman or because of their sexual orientation. And the last one would be religion. FHA makes it unlawful to discriminate in housing on the basis of one's religion. Tenants, applicants are protected against religious discrimination, whether they consider themselves to be members of a particular religion or none at all. This prohibition covers instances of overt discrimination against members of a particular religion. So an example would be, it could be innocent, but it's still a practice. If a landlord asks the applicant what their religious denomination, they have no right to ask them that question. So that's an example how that can happen in the application process. If you find that there is an issue, you're working with a client or a client has complained to you that they've been discriminated against, there's avenues they can take. The first thing I say, work with your local fair housing agency. We will supply you with that link. You can find out who your local fair housing agency. They do their due diligence. They will actually, they'll take your information timely, and then they'll actually go out and do an actual investigation. And the reason why I say contact your local fair housing agency, because they know all of the protections in your particular area versus HUD. HUD is just going to just enforce the federal. But if you go to your local fair housing agency, they're going to drill down on what's locally, not just federal, but what's local as well. And then also you can contact HUD if you feel HUD, and that's the HUD number, and contact the Federal Housing and Equal Opportunity, and that's the information as well. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a test. And the first thing is, the landlord asked the applicant if they belong to a synagogue. What type of discrimination would that be? I'll give you guys a few minutes. Booyah. Cool beans, you're right, religion. So the next one would be, the landlord states that the applicant would be more comfortable living in building B because that building is more child friendly. What type of discriminatory practice is this? Booyah, you guys got it. Oh, did I get, yeah, 100% got that. So let's move on because I know we're on time. Davey, I guess, yo, there's the results. So everybody got that question. Again, if you have any questions regarding fair housing, feel free to do a TA session with us. And if we don't have an answer, we will connect you to your fair housing agency to make sure you get the answer and to get the assistance you need. So we're going to finish this last portion. United States is facing, we all know there's a housing crisis according to the recent GAP report by the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And the most that are affected are vulnerable populations. Because of demand for affordable housing, applicants must be cautious of unethical landlords who want to prey on vulnerable applicants or applicants unaware of their rights. So before signing, it's imperative that if you're working with the newcomer, that they know what predatory practices are and what their rights are. And how am I doing on time, David?
Well, we're at 12:44 and wanted to have a little bit of time for questions. So yeah, if you could, I know this is important information, so maybe 2 to 3 more minutes and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, I'm gonna skip over this. We're gonna go into the nitty gritty. So this is what I'm gonna go over some practices and terms applicants should be cautious about before signing a lease. If there's no unit to inspect, if a landlord won't allow you to view the unit before signing a lease, that could be a major red flag. Never, ever, ever sign. There's difference if you're interested in an actual unit over the phone, but don't sign the lease until you actually do the inspection. That's kind of predatory. They ask you to sign the lease first without inspecting the unit. If the landlord offers no written lease, even though verbal leases are not is not considered predatory depending on your state, because some states do allow oral leases, but it can be a problem, especially if you're working with an unethical landlord. Without a written lease, it could be used as a strategy either to keep them under the radar from reporting to the IRS, or because there's no lease, and if there's an issue, they can constantly do what they want with that actual client. The landlord is pressuring the applicant to sign a lease without reading it. A landlord that pressures an applicant to sign a lease without reading it, that's a major red flag. Another red flag is if they are hesitant to answer questions regarding a lease or state that the unit would rent quickly. Now, if it's a reputable landlord and there's a language barrier, they should allow that client to have you as a sponsor if you speak their language, or a trusted family friend or family member to interpret what's going on in that lease signing. I want to say this as best practices. I do not recommend anybody under the age of 18 doing the translation during the signing. And the reason why is because an 18-year-old can't go into a lease. Legally, they can't sign a contract. So why would you have them do the interpretation? So they can, but I would not recommend it. The landlord requests post-dated checks. Checks can ensure that a tenant does pay rent. However, if a landlord requires multiple post-dated checks before moving in, it could be a questionable practice that allows the landlord to withdraw money from their account at any time. Another thing is no income reference or background checks. Now, I understand due to the barriers newcomers have with alternative documentation and no U.S. rental history and limited income, it may be tempting to try to lease them with a landlord that does not require that, but that is a bad idea. A legitimate housing provider would want some documentation on their tenants. So just FYI. If the rent is too good to be true and it's below market rate, that is another red flag. Do your due diligence. Another thing that we call it is a bait and switch. A big red flag is when a landlord posts a picture of a unit to pique your interest, but it's not available, or the unit you actually is touring is something that's totally different that they told you that your client would be leasing. And I'm hurrying up due to time. Or if the landlord requires an unusual deposit, this is a red flag. Security deposits do have legal limits. Please check with your state laws to see what is the limit for a deposit. So just FYI, if they go over that limit that your state requires, that could be a red flag. Another thing is the late fee is unreasonable. That's why it's so important that you help your client with that lease, reading through the lease. Even though a client plans on being a good tenant, things happen and sometimes they are unable to pay their rent. I mean, life happens. But a reasonable rate is under 5%. So if that lease says that they're going to charge you more than 5% on a late fee, that's a predatory practice. Just FYI. If the lease mentions mold, again, that's why you need to make sure that testing, you can get additional documentation from the landlord to show that the unit did test negative. There was mediation done, renovations done, but you still would have to, especially if the building is 1978, they still have to have you sign that waiver. And I'm trying to hurry up. Or if the landlord asks an applicant to wire money or pay cash, that's a red flag. And if the lease states that the tenant is responsible for all damages and repairs. Now, a tenant must, by law, leave the property in the state he or she left it in before moving. But again, each state has a threshold on how much can be charged for damages. And I'm going to do a quick check-in, name some predatory leasing practices. I'm waiting on responses. I see you. There you go, no checks. Late fees, watch the late fees. Again, check with your state laws to see what late fees are. And I will gather that information, the links for you, so you can check with your specific state so you'll know what's considered predatory. I see one more person and then we're going to go into questions. You guys got it. Yay. Bait and switch. Yes. So that concludes this, my portion of the webinar. Again, my name is Lynette Pearl. I know I went over a lot of material with you. However, feel free to reach out to me. You can mail me at lpearl@cwsglobal.org, or you can set up a TA session with not just me, but we have a team of experts. My colleagues, they're excellent. So feel free to go to our website and book a TA session. And back to you, David.
Great, thank you so much. A lot of great information, and again, we'll send out the recording. So I had two questions in the chat, and then we can start with that. So I have a question here. If a landlord is not letting a newcomer view their property, what will be the follow-up for the discrimination based on receiving rental assistance?
Okay, I gotta dissect it. So the landlord is not letting them review the property. Can you repeat that, David?
Yeah, it's not, I think, and again,
Maybe that's two questions. That doesn't.
Yeah, this comes from Zara, so feel free to come off mute if I'm not reflecting your question properly. But yeah, maybe it's that the landlord knows that they're getting rental assistance. And maybe based on
yeah, actually, when I wanted to request for a tour for one of the families, then when I called the landlord, they mentioned they are not gonna let the landlord, like they are not encouraged to view let a person to view a property if they are receiving rental assistance. And then I was just confused. How can I follow up?
Oh, wait. They won't let them review they won't let them tour the property because they're receiving rental assistance?
Yep.
That's the source of income discrimination. Email me offline and I'm gonna connect you to your local fair housing agency. And then I'll, is it Zara? Zara, what state are you in by chance?
Minnesota.
Okay, could you please email me and I'm gonna give you some information. Because we can contact your fair housing agency, your local agency, and we can, I can show you how you can fill the complaint and they can do a full-fledged investigation.
So I'm just asking for future,
Okay. Oh, okay.
if like the same comments from landlords, I would just know what to do because it was in the like last year and I was completely lost. And just, I thought it would be better to just look for other properties.
Yeah, that's discrimination based on income. I can't believe a landlord would actually say that. But you'd be surprised. But because when I used to work with clients with housing choice vouchers, a lot of landlords would say, well, I don't do Section 8, which is their legal right. However, I would just say, well, the one thing about a client that has a voucher, they're always going to have a support system your other tenants don't have. And if there's issues, you have me. I'm part of that support system. If you have any concerns, then I would ask them, why do you have concerns not taking a housing choice voucher? Is because you can't pass the inspection. And that's another thing I have found, especially if a landlord feels there's a subsidy tied to it, they feel that they don't want the government in their business, or that they have to go through an inspection, which they usually have to if they're going to receive assistance. So they probably can't pass an inspection. So I would ask, is your concerns not taking the subsidies because you feel that your unit would be inspected? If so, I can show you how you can get your unit up to code in order for it to pass an inspection. Because that was one of the things I have found why a lot of my potential landlords would not take a housing choice voucher, because they knew that unit could not pass an inspection. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you for the response.
And if it doesn't, we can talk offline. Feel free. We can do a TA session and we can talk offline and come up with some solutions.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I see a hand raised from Thea, so feel free to come off mute and answer your question.
Hi. I'll lower my hand. Yeah, I have two questions. I'll start with the first. Also, thank you, Lynette. This presentation has been incredibly informative. So thank you for that. So my first question is, according to I also am in Minnesota. Zahra and I are actually on the same team. According to the Minnesota, and according to a document by the Office of the Minnesota Attorney General, Minnesota doesn't set a limit, or Minnesota law, state law, doesn't set a limit on security deposits. And so I had mentioned, you said in the presentation that there are generally limits. And since Minnesota doesn't seem to have one, I was wondering if you could give like a general ballpark to look for.
The best practices for that would be 2 months rent.
Okay, thank you.
That's best practice.
2 months rent.
Mm-hmm.
And then my second, thank you for that. And my second question is, you listed a couple things that are good to bring to a housing inspection, including like a phone charger and a flashlight. Are there any other like objects on that list if I was going to put together like a little to-go bag?
What I would do, I had pictures of stuff. This is just me, and because the time limit, I couldn't put all the pictures. Common things that a unit might have, like pests. I would have a picture, so if I saw something similar on the wall, of course, I'm not pest control, but I would have something to kind of give me an idea if it was roach droppings like I showed earlier. So I would recommend have pictures as well. I do have an HQS inspection. It's called Housing Quality Inspection. That's what they use for housing authorities. There is a checklist you can use. I use the checklist to make sure I checked everything outside and inside, and I would check it as I went off, as I did my inspection. So I do highly recommend you get a checklist, a HQS and checklist to say, okay, did I check this in the kitchen? Did I check this in the bathroom? Did I check this in the living room area?
Thank you. That makes sense. I appreciate that.
And I do know that one of our colleagues did develop inspection booklet, so I'll make sure David get that as well, and Highest as well. It's in more detail, so I'll make sure that he'll send that information out to you. But also, if you email me right quick, I can, by the time I get done with this presentation and lunch, I can send you some additional information as well you can take with you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'll get on it.
We have just a few minutes. I see another question in the chat that I think we may have already been addressed around discrimination related to source of income. It's asking if someone has an assistance program to pay for rent, like RAFT, can the Lord deny it? Would that be discrimination? Would that be the case?
It's again, it's a source of income, but again, it depends on your state and local laws. Technically, landlords don't have to take it, but if a client, especially, one of the things we felt in here in KC was ERAP. When emergency assistance, a lot of landlords did not want to take it. It was not because they didn't want to take it, they just didn't want to deal with the process of the application. So if you find that a landlord doesn't want to take something, usually it's not because they don't want the money, they don't want to be hassled with the process. So I suggest to say, if you need assistance on actually doing the actual application, we can help you with that if you feel comfortable. And that's what we did. I have found nobody's going to turn down free money. Okay. The problem is a lot of landlords just don't feel comfortable or savvy enough doing that, accepting it and doing the application, because there's an application they have to fill out as well.
Yeah, I remember hearing that was a bit of a process for both tenants and landlords. That's a really good point. And I think we have time for one final question here from Mina, also in the Q&A. And I think this gets to the question around, again, landlords refusing to rent to refugees, and also how you can get an apartment, do the housing search in preparation, I think, before the clients even arrive.
Oh, that's a large question. We do have a training in our archives how to do a housing search. So there, that's a lot, but I can, whoever has that question, again, feel free to email me and I can send you the link to that training. And then also we have also supportive material on our website as well on how to do a housing search.
Excellent. Well, we are right up on time, and thank you so much, Lynette, as always. Thank you everyone for joining, and I just dropped a link to a survey. If you have an opportunity to go ahead and just open that now and just take a minute to fill it out either now or when you log off. But we just again want to thank our presenter and for you all for attending, and the link is really an opportunity to get your feedback and improve this, and also get any ideas about potential topics moving forward. So thank you all, and have a good rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you.